Okay, this is a slideshow of an incident that happened around 19 spring, summer 85 or the fall of 84. 84 to 85, this incident took place. This is a Beechcraft 1900. Okay, it holds like 21 people. It's a full capability aircraft, which meant is you could fill it with people, fuel, and it was a pressurized cabin. It was quite a step up from the Beechcraft 99. The Beechcraft 99 is what this airline flew until we accepted. I think we took like out of the first 25 or 30 that were built that came off the line in Wichita for Beechcraft, we got 8 of the first like 25 or 30 came to us, and we even had what they call UB1 was one of the prototypes. They gave us one of the prototypes they had until to help us with our schedule until we could get these new ones in. But these were a brand new airplane, and they had, I had just got hired by Brockway. The Veterans Administration in Essex County, New York, had a program. It was an apprentice program where the VA would pay half and the employer would pay half. And one of the programs was as a starter mechanic at Brockway Air. And since I had a service record, my DD-214 showed that I had been a weapons systems technician on the F-4J, equivalent to the F-35. It was state-of-the-art for the time, and I was avionics on it. 4 years, went to school, spent about a half a year out of 4 years just sitting in classrooms. Well, anyway, when the head of maintenance saw my resume, he says, hire him. So they hired me at $6 an hour. This was in about 1983, 84, at $6 an hour. The VA paid $3 and the company paid $3. Okay, but while I'm talking, I'm going to start. This is about a 3-minute slideshow, and we'll go through all the pictures from that night. But as soon as this thing went down on its wing, when the maintenance manager, whose name was Frank, when he showed up, he asked me, he knew I was a photo nut from being in the service. I always had a camera on me. He said, have you got your camera? I go, it's in the car. He says, take as many pictures as you can. I need this documented. So I ran downtown and I got the 400 speed. I went to someplace downtown open all night and got 400 speed film. That's why these pictures aren't as crisp or defined or resolution, because I was using a fast speed film and you lose a lot of resolution. But I'll start the slideshow as we talk. But this thing went down. There's a story behind this. Okay, that hangar right there was basically brand new. Brockway got grants and whatever and money to build a new hangar, and we used to service the planes inside this hangar. It was an FBO. We had like 8 planes. We serviced all these milk runs in upstate New York. The plane would make a 20-minute flight and land. When that plane was done for the day, it might have like 7 hours on it and 12 takeoffs and landings. Okay? Because they'd hit all these little airports in upstate New York. But as you can see, this was a brand new airplane. This airplane probably was less than a year or two old. But when the slideshow starts, I'll take one slide at a time, and it's the perfect example of Murphy's Law. The perfect example of Murphy's Law, and I hope no Irishmen take offense at that, but I was in the service. I've been working on airplanes for a long time. I'm a knuckle-dragging ape. I'm blue-collar. I'm not a lawyer, okay? I don't have lawyer credentials, but this thing is a true example of what can go wrong will go wrong. What can go wrong will go wrong. I got hired just after they put in an order for these planes. So Beechcraft, the first week I was with the airline, the first couple of weeks, Beechcraft sent up a guy, and for a week we went to school about 8 hours a day for a week on that airplane. The maintenance manual wasn't much more than a couple inches thick for the whole airplane. But we went through hydraulics, we went through pneumatics, we went through pressurization, the engines, all this stuff, the whole airplane. And lasted about a week. And I was fortunate enough to be able to make that class. And here I was a brand new employee. That's another thing. The other employees both had A&P licenses, and I didn't because I was an apprentice. Because they had an A&P license, they could sign off work. I couldn't sign off my own work. Somebody had to sign my work off. And once I established my knowledge of electronics, my knowledge of the airplane, my spirit to get things done and fix things the right way, get it done as fast as possible, to make schedule in the morning. When they saw I had that kind of outlook, and I was reliable. I made it to work every night. I never stiffed them, okay, or didn't show up. But this is what happened, and we're back. Are we back? Did I hit something and slow this down? I may have. But I hope my friend in Tulsa, Dean, sees this film. I wish he was here to help me. But the way this went down, it could have been preventable. We didn't know, and the engineers didn't know. Nobody figured this out in Wichita, that when you service hydraulics on this airplane with power off, all the interlocks that keep the hydraulic system stabilized and in place and locked in its place in the airplane, all those solenoids that are gates that lock, there's Frank right there. All right, all these solenoids in the plane that lock under power. So when the power's off the airplane, there's no isolation of the hydraulic system. And there was no indication anywhere that when it says when you service hydraulics with nitrogen, service the accumulator, that's a prop that got bent right there. But this plane went down. Okay, what the routine was that night, this was about halfway through the shift. It was a slow night, real slow nights, not too many write-ups. We were ahead of the game. This plane had been down to the other end in the wash rack getting washed. So it got all washed, it got all fueled. It had like 8,000 pounds of fuel, 4,000 in each wing. And they wheeled it in for a quick inspection. They wheeled it into the, and because it was a slow night, we were all there. looking at the plane. Well, anyway, it was discovered. When I get to a wheel well picture, I'll stop. We get to a picture. All right. This wheel well, up inside the wheel well, these clamshell doors and the gear, is a meter with a aluminum or stainless steel bottle that's an accumulator. And that accumulator that night on the walk around during the inspection, whoever found it, it could have been me, it could have been Dean, whoever found it, it had to be serviced. The indicator was low on the accumulator. That meant it had to be serviced. Now, we had nitrogen bottles, so we were all standing around. There was 3 of us here. There was this one guy named John who was classified as a mechanic, but he wasn't much of a mechanic. He was more like a taxi driver pilot. He was a pilot that could do taxi runs across the lake to Burlington in a Cessna because he was a licensed pilot. And he also had mechanic credentials, but he never did mechanic work. He'd come to work every night and walk around the plane for hours, spit on the floor, had no respect for the rest of us. More or less, I'm a glorified pilot. I'm not a mechanic. I don't do mechanic work. Well, anyway, we had another guy named Cletus. Cletus was retired Air Force. He was used to running paperwork. That was his job. He retired out of the Air Force as a senior NCO. He ran paperwork. And Cletus was more than happy to let me do the work. And he'd always say, go ahead, do it. I trust you. Everybody else trusted me. I'll sign off your work. And I did that. We used to change fuel nozzles. And another thing about this FBO is when I got out into the industry, I found out just how cheap the guy that was running this FBO was. We had to rivet our own brake pads on our brake disc. We had to change our own brushes in our starter generators. We had to do all this work that it should have been sent out. Like when we do the brake jobs, we should have had new discs and pads overhauled coming in from a supplier. We didn't. We had to drill out the old pads, rivet the new discs on, and they were saving money hands over fist because all these items that should have been shipped in with a tag on them that they were airworthy, we were doing. And I didn't know anything. I was so stupid up there. To tell you how stupid I was and to tell you where my friend Dean made me aware of how stupid I was, this FBO did not have a cage for inflating tires. What they call a tire cage. Every place I've ever seen that was upscale or medium scale aircraft repair had a tire inflation cage. So that because they put tremendous amounts of air in these aircraft tires, sometimes 120 pounds. 120 pounds of air. And they should be inflated. When we used to take tires apart, take the halves apart, clean them up in solvent with our hands, breathing, having solvent on our hands and everything like that. And I forgot where I was. Anyway, what happened that night is Cletus came out of the office. It was such a slow night, and he figured, for once, I'll do something. I'll do some mechanic work. So he took a flashlight, and he crawled up in this well with a flashlight, right? Here he was, retired from the Air Force, probably over 40, wife and kids. So he crawled up in this, and we hooked up the Schrader valve from the tanks, the nitrogen tanks. And Dean and I and John were standing right here in front of the airplane. And when Cletus, after he got the Schrader valve hooked up and he was ready for nitrogen, he told John, he says, okay, give me some air. And he was watching the gauge up inside this wheel well. And John, smart aleck John, who's not really a mechanic, instead of slowly cracking that valve on that nitrogen bottle to where he was just going to apply just enough pressure to put that accumulator to bring it up to where it was, all he had to do is just crack that bottle just enough to give enough air to serve it. And there's Cletus with the flashlight standing up inside of this well. The plane is level. This wing is filled with fuel. This wing is filled with fuel. And John, like an idiot, and I will, he was an idiot. When Cletus said, give me some air, John took that valve handle and spun it open. Spun it open. So the whole airplane got this super charge of nitrogen in the hydraulic system. Because there was nothing in the maintenance manual, nobody had ever foreseen this, and we didn't have power on the plane. When it came in with no write-ups or anything like that. There was no reason to put power on the plane. We saw that it needed a service accumulator, but in the the maintenance manual, nowhere in the maintenance manual that was generated in Beechcraft did it say when you service the accumulator would power off the aircraft, make sure you are on jacks. Like I said, what can go wrong will go wrong. These people at Beechcraft in Wichita, all the engineers never sat in a room and pondered what would happen if the power was off the aircraft and somebody tried to service the accumulator. What would happen is all the solenoids would be open and fluid can move anywhere. Well, when John opened up that bottle and gave that accumulator that huge charge with the power off, this right wing over here immediately collapsed. Immediately. You got 4,000 pounds of weight. When that charge started moving fluid, it collapsed this gear over here. And one thing about the Beech 1900, they didn't have gear locks. This plane never had gear locks. When it was on the ground, you didn't go out with a cast iron shackle that you put around the gear to keep a gear linkage to keep it from folding. They didn't have gear locks. Nobody thought about it. This was for civilian use and not military. Why would we need gear locks? All right. Well, this thing went down and this thing went up, and Cletus wasn't crouched in here anymore. He was standing up straight, looking up at that gauge. And Cletus spent the rest of the night walking around that hangar, smoking cigarettes, talking to himself. Because he realized if this wing would have went down instead of this wing, he would have been clamshelled. He would have been Hamburg up inside here. And there's nothing we could do. You wouldn't believe it took hours. It was into the morning before we finally got this thing up on its gear again. Got it lifted up. First of all, we had to take the electric fuel pump. We had to hook up a fuel line here to the engine and turn on the electric fuel pump and pump all the fuel in this wing into a truck, a receiver truck, a fueling truck to get it out of the wing. We had to pump the plane empty of fuel. That took hours. Then we had to find out a way to lift it. I don't know if they had a forklift or whatever, but we had all kinds of pads and everything to put. It wrinkled the wing. The wing had to be sent out to an overhaul facility to get reskinned and realigned and reskinned. But like I said, Murphy's Law. Nobody saw this coming. They had a class for us. They had a maintenance manual for us to read. Nothing in the maintenance manual ever said to have jacks under the plane if you don't have power on. Now, I'll move along. I'm hoping my friend Dean gets to see this, because there's the bottles. That's what he did. He spun that bottle open and gave that thing, so it was like hitting that hydraulic system with a tidal wave. Anybody who works on airplanes, you never spin something like that open. But he was there. He figures, well, I didn't know if he thought it was a joke or whatever to spin that bottle open, but I know one thing: when you're working with compressed air, compressed gas, you do not do, you're careful. Everything moves slowly. It's gas. It's under pressure. Okay? And to spin that valve open the way he did, it immediately collapsed that wing. I saw it. I took these pictures. Okay? Another thing where these people that thought they knew didn't know. They thought they knew, they didn't know. Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law is used in just about any industrial situation where there are pinch points, burn points, fall points, anything where there's hazardous, people apply Murphy's Law. Anybody that was in the Navy who worked on the carriers, you never believed in Murphy's Law. When I worked for United Airlines in San Francisco, they had good cleanups every night. Every night at the end of the shift, there was a good cleanup to put the dock back into the shape that we found it. Why? Because of Murphy's Law. We don't want a bunch of tools and ladders and airlines and electrical all running around, and we don't need debris cluttering up the work area. But that's what happened. I left Brockway shortly after this. When I got my A&P license, I left. I had a friend who lived in Seattle. She called me up and said, "You can leave at any time, come here and stay." I went and stayed with her. I went for a few job interviews in Seattle and found I didn't want anything to do with working any overhaul facilities in Seattle. And then World Airways in Oakland ran an ad in the Seattle paper saying airplane mechanics needed in Oakland, World Airways. And I went down to the Red Lion, I think, at SeaTac for an interview with this lady, and she told me, "You're hired. Get to Oakland as fast as you can." And that started me working on bigger airplanes. But I cut my teeth on this airplane. And to tell you about the tires, the tire cage, one night like an idiot, because I didn't know. I was avionics. What do I know? All right? And I hadn't been to any formal schools yet on A&P. Well, I'm working as busy as a bee. I'm trying to change a tire on this, and you have to take these tires apart. They come apart, and you have to wash them. and inspect for cracks and stuff the best you can. We didn't have any way to inspect them for cracks. You just assumed it came off, it was good, it's going to go back on, it's good. But you have to put the two halves together, and there was probably 8 or 9 bolts down here that had to be torqued. And I'm working as fast as I can because I got a couple tires to change. I haven't got time to fool around. So I'm at the bench, and these tires, for a regular basis, I was doing this alone a lot. Standing over the tire right under me. I'm looking down at the tire. My face is right over, and I'm pumping 120 pounds of air in this tire. And Dean one night came up to me and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Do you realize how dangerous you are right now standing over that? If that thing comes apart and splits, which they do," he said, "it's going to take your head off." Really. Thank you, Dean. One of the most prophetic things he ever said to me was, "Don't stand over that tire." So we used to feel, but we never did have a tire inflation cage. That should have been one of the first requirements. But like I said, we saved the owner of this airline so much money because he didn't have to buy prepackaged parts. And another thing about buying prepackaged parts, they're usually inspected for serviceability. They have a tag on them. It says it's been tested, it's ready for service, put it on the airplane. We never had that at Brockway. Go ahead.
Hi. How's your day unfolding? Feeling all right today?
I feel with my fingers. What can I do with you? What do you need?